3, 4.
I'd like to give my thoughts on a few issues. I'm back now at Political Today. Nothing has changed. It's the same old news. So what makes the news cycle work? That's what I'd like to talk about a little bit in this segment. First, the news cycle really is just the way things are repeated. You hear the same stories over and over again, like Russiagate with Trump is a constant story that we hear again and again. And the louder they get, with more people come to listen. It's like hearing a cowbell. You just respond and you can't ignore it. And so that's what's happening there. And then naturally, if they got any traction and they were to remove Trump from office, then we'd all be hearing about Hillary, because naturally the reason the Russians rigged the elections was to stop Hillary. And so naturally Hillary should be president. That's what most people believe who think that Trump should be taken out of office. And so then we'd be hearing about Hillary. But then once Hillary would get back into the news, then we'd be hearing about Bernie Sanders and what she did to Bernie Sanders. And so the cycle really is Trump, Clinton, and then Sanders. So then in that order, we hear the story over and over and over again, repeated constantly. And it's just so I got tired of repeating myself after a while, because I became aware that this is the same story. I'm just adding another level of noise to it. And so I wanted to find something else to talk about. So let's talk about the news and how do we perceive information as we get it from the news source. Well, it's our perception, the way you perceive the world. If you think the world is a happy days world, then maybe you're a progressive. If you think it's Father's knows best, and that defines the world for you and how you would think the world should be, then maybe you're conservative. And if you're a liberal, maybe you live in Mayberry, and you think that the people ought to be civil and treat each other nicely like they do in Mayberry or Mayberry RFD. So we all have these dreams of how we like the world to be, and most of the time that's how we interpret information that comes to us. And I'll just say that my view is more like, X-Files kind of stuff. I really think that most of the time, if you gave people the truth and you gave it without any spin, they would automatically reject it and think it wasn't true. They'd call it a conspiracy. It would seem too fantastic to them. So for the most part, you have to wedge the truth with a couple lies, which is most of the time what people do. Trump probably has interest in Russia, business interests, and all kinds of things he may be doing. But they're not going to focus on that as much as that the Russians really stole the election, rigged the election, and they're going to aim in that direction because they have to give you only use some element of truth, so that then wedged with a bunch of fabrications, you'll believe it. And the more you believe, then they'll be able to continue to repeat that story, and you'll keep tuning in. The alternative press isn't any better. They do more of the same stuff. They tell the same stories, really. They repeat things the same way. It's not much different. So how do you change your perception, really? See, maybe you can see the world more truly, more clearly, more honestly, and more and be more genuine with information, how you understand, interpret information. Well, first you have to accept that your views are based on your perception of how you think the world should be, more than how it is. And if you really want to know how the world is, then you have to question your assumptions. And that's how you learn about the world and how it is to question everything. And that's where you begin to, real wisdom or knowledge begins. If you don't question your own perceptions of the world, you'll never get a real answer. So So how do you analyze things? Lately, I've been watching episodes of The Strain. I kind of like that show. It's now they're in their 4th season, and it looks like the world's blown apart, and that they're living in an apocalypse where all the politicians are really just these vampires who just want to suck their blood, and the press is just a way to deny that this is that they're all really been brought into slave conditions. And so that's another way of viewing the world. That's sort of my version of it. And so if you don't want to be a slave, and you don't want to be enslaved by other people's perceptions or your own perceptions of the world, you have to then question everything. And then that's where you begin to see things, I think, in a new way and in a different way, possibly than you have before. In particular, I think the Constitution is something that's misunderstood, both by the left and the right, and it's this different views, but neither are the correct views, is what sort of keeps the controversy going, the same conversation going, where nothing ever really changes and nothing new is really ever discussed. So for now, we'll just leave it at that. What is your story? How do you perceive the world? And what television show sort of points out your vision of the news? And then just give me more cowbell, and we'll talk about this more later.
Guess what? I got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell.